Good morning. I'm Ken Bibry, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. On our last episode, we welcomed David McIntosh, the CEO of the Club for Growth, and former Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio, for a discussion on the blockchain, innovation, and crypto. Today, we continue this kind of thought around bipartisanship and collaboration when we welcome Layla Zaidane, CEO of Future Caucus, for a conversation today. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Ken. I've been excited about this.
I mean, your office is so majestic. I mean, we should start, there, right? I mean,
Yeah, I'm actually here at Buckingham Palace looking for Kate Middleton. So right after this, I'll be prowling the halls.
put in a good word for me. I mean,
Yeah.
that looks amazing. Well, it's so good to see you. We've long been friends and connected, and I've been, a follower of what was Millennial Action Project to now Future Caucus. But fill us in. Give us the kind of origin story of kind of how this organization came to be and where you guys are headed.
Yeah. So Future Caucus was launched in 2013, and the really driving question was, what would we be possible if we put a rising generation of young elected officials in a room together and just watch them succeed? We were seeing a ton of gridlock and dysfunction, and this is back in 2013.
That's all gone now, right?
Yeah, we fixed it. We've actually fixed it. But this notion of, as millennials were just starting their public service careers, and now 10 years later, Gen Z, would there be an opportunity for the next generation to transcend polarization and to lead more effectively if we created the spaces and resources for them to really develop healthy relationships and work on effective policy? And so we launched the Congressional Future Caucus in 2013. Since then, we've launched in 34 states a Future Caucus, which is led by one young Democrat, one young Republican, open to all of the young elected leaders in the state legislature, if it's a state one. And so far, we've engaged more than 1,800 young elected officials.
Wow. I mean, some pretty incredible metrics, right? So, like, how many states are you in now? What kind of percent of saturation are you getting from electeds? I mean, pretty incredible already.
Totally. It's honestly, I feel very hopeful in doing this work because I get to see up close so much of the work that young people at the forefront of. We have launched a formal Future Caucus in 34 states,
Wow.
which is awesome. But we also have cross-state programming, and that's open to young people, young elected officials in all 50 states and the territories. And so we've actually engaged with people in every state in the country.
Wow. So it's funny because you're so focused on young people, bringing people together, and it's 2024, an election year. The two candidates aren't necessarily millennials running for president, right? So it's this interesting time where it almost seems like it's less about coming together and more about kind of, not running to the fringes, but it's kind of people going back to their home base a little bit. Like, what do you think about 2024? How does your message and your effort kind of, play into that?
I think one of the biggest risks when we think about politics and policy is nationalizing everything. And you're totally right. At the top of the ticket right now, we've got two super old guys who are running in a rematch, and it feels very stale, like we've seen this show before. And then we complain, right? We're like, where's the bench? Where's the young people? And that doesn't happen overnight. We've got to make sure that we're both recruiting young people and then retaining them once they step into public office. And I actually think where we've gone wrong is spend a lot of energy trying to convince the next generation of people to run, and not enough energy helping them succeed and helping them really stick with it for a while once they are elected. And I actually think that that's what can get more young people excited about participation and really positively contributing in our democracy, is when they see examples of other young people actually getting things done. And oftentimes more down ballot at the state level is where you can see those success stories.
Yeah. Well, what I love about what you're doing is every time we catch up, you're literally in a different place, but you're outside of Washington, right? So, like, talk about the significance of that, right? Like, I feel like too, when I travel for clients on like site selection or projects, when you get together, you're talking about the kind of the benefits of maybe federal support on larger real estate or programs, but it's not in a political way. It's more about like, how do we all work together to create projects, to create jobs, to improve communities, right? I feel like once you get out of the DC bubble, like, is it much easier to do what you do when you're outside of DC?
Oh, undoubtedly,
Yeah.
undoubtedly. And I think there's still, like I said, sort of the risk of over nationalizing the conversation and sort of falling into culture wars on
Hmm.
a very small percentage of issues. But at the end of the day, when you focus on what is it that this community needs, what is it that we can work on together, there's a lot of opportunity to get things done. And that's why I spend so much time traveling around to visit all of our different state future
Yeah.
caucuses. Today, I'm in Danville, Virginia, with a group working with the local community here on what they're doing to build bridges. What is it that they're doing to revitalize their economy? It's sort of a town that's been a little bit left behind and is leading these incredible sort of transformative efforts. But just last week, I was in Albany, where we were with our New York State Future
Great.
Caucus and hosted a meeting where they talked about the importance of AI legislation to strengthen our elections, protect our elections. And our young people there actually introduced a bill that's
Yeah.
about to get signed into law to do that. So it's just really cool to go sort of travel around, figure out what's top of mind, and actually see people move things forward.
Yeah, because at the local level, I mean, you can't really get away with the kind of hyper partisan behavior, right? Like
Mhm.
at the local level, people want to see results, like are potholes getting filled,
Yeah.
or is your community getting improved, right? So it's almost like starting there, and these are the people who end up then running for Congress and for
Yeah.
governor and other stuff, right? So maybe talk a little bit about that. You've had enough candidates from like 2013 at local levels. Like, have you been tracking folks over time? Like, how have they
Hmm.
how has that resulted and materialized and kind of validated your mission?
Yeah. Well, I think state legislatures in and of themselves are places where we can get a lot done, where there's a lot of sort of direct impact on people's
Yeah.
lives. And I'm going to quiz you right now, pop quiz. I didn't tell you we were going to do this, but about 1 in 5 state legislators right now is a young person. What percentage of bipartisan legislation that gets signed into law at the state level do you think is authored by a young person?
Ooh, 30%?
30, yeah, 33%. Very good. 1 in 5 state legislators is young,
Wow.
but 1 in 3 pieces of bipartisan legislation
Is from a younger
authored
person.
by a young
Wow,
person. So
interesting.
they're like definitely punching above their weight when it comes
Love
to
it.
figuring out how to work together. And that muscle memory is super, super helpful once they get elected to Congress. And we know that
Right.
about 50% of Congress actually gets their start at the state level. And last session, we had about 8 members of our state legislatures get elected to Congress. This year, we're tracking some races. We feel excited about that. Um,
Nice.
and it's been, a wave of millennials stepping into public service. In 2022, we had our first Gen Zer
Yeah.
elected. Maxwell Frost, the first Gen Z
Yeah.
member of Congress, who we gave an award to at our Rising Star Awards at the end of last year. So it's really encouraging to see this sort of wave of young people. The challenge is let's make sure that we nurture those effective instincts
Yeah.
that we're seeing at the state level once they get to Congress.
So let's do a little bit more on that, right? Because one of the things that we've chatted about in the past that I never really gave enough thought to was the idea of retention, right? Like I feel like so many people are kind of like, we need term limits, we need to throw the bums out and get new people all the time, right? But like this idea of like actually once you get into office, learning and diversifying your own skill set and understanding of
Hmm.
issues, and then kind of having enough seniority to actually make impact, like the significance of that. Like, so talk a little bit about the retention strategy, because I feel like a lot of people don't talk about that. Like, it's always about like recruiting new people, getting people excited. And maybe it's because we all have such short attention spans these days that it's like, what's new versus like, stay committed to the other folks that are working hard on the ground that maybe it's not as exciting, but they're passing bipartisan legislation or they're impacting communities. Like, how does that play out for you?
Yeah, I think there's a line that George Washington says in Hamilton, and maybe he said it in real life too, but Hamilton is my frame of reference for this. He says, winning is easy, governing's harder.
Yeah.
And I think that is why, as people, we're really drawn to helping people win
Yeah.
and much less interested in what happens sort of after the dog catches the car, right?
Got it.
Um, and I think that one of the reasons why when we rebranded from Millennial Action Project to Future Caucus, that we really wanted to do that is because we didn't just want the focus of the organization to be, let's just get all the millennials together next to each other and they'll govern and that'll just sort of
Yeah.
fix it. And them being there will sort of solve the problem. We actually asked them, we surveyed all 1,800 members and we said, what are some of the barriers that are keeping you from being successful? And they told us four things. One was they wanted more diverse networks. So they wanted to be connected to
Yeah.
other people who could help them as peers and who could be governing vehicles for them. Two is they didn't get any professional development. So
Mm.
they weren't getting trained, especially if you're early on in your career. You haven't gotten some of the things that are sort of second nature when we think about onboarding new talent and retaining talent in business. That doesn't exist in the public sector and in government. And so really ensuring that we're giving them professional development opportunities. Three was connections to policy, good
Mm.
unbiased policy solutions. And so we've built something to support them on the issues that really matter to them. And then four is amplifying their stories. It's so noisy and so
Yeah.
difficult to sort of get that positive reinforcement for their positive leadership. They were really facing challenges in getting their stories out there. And so those four things in different ways lead to people just getting burnt out, feeling like
Yeah.
they're banging their head against a wall, and just deciding that it's not worth it to run again. Not to mention all of the sort of
Yeah.
harassment, low pay, some of the other structural things that make it really tough to just stay an elected
Well,
official.
let's come back to that part, but this kind of notion of like the training and onboarding, like, so let's
Mhm.
talk about that for a second, right? Because I find that to be such a fascinating thing, right? I remember when I was in grad school at the Kennedy School, they used to host like a new member of
Yeah.
Congress, like 2 day thing. And it was like a 101 on like, how do you actually serve in Congress? And I always found it so fascinating because it's like you work so hard to campaign and get elected, but then it's like there's no real playbook on like, how do you actually do this, right? Like, so
Yeah.
any other career, you would be put through a training, a rigorous program, right? Like, here's the keys to your congressional office, and you represent, 200,000 people. Like, go to work. It's like there is a bit of a learning curve. Like, Congress is
Mhm.
complicated, state legislatures are complicated. Like, I feel like that's such a kind of untapped area of need, if you will, right?
Totally. And think about your first few days on the job. You're like filling out your HR forms and you're trying to learn everything. A 2-day boot camp at the
Yeah,
start of your career is not enough for you to
no,
retain that
yeah,
information. It needs to be ongoing. I'll tell you a story in Kansas when our young people there launched a Future Caucus it was the House and the Senate, so it was bicameral. They went to leadership and they said, listen, in Kansas, the number one export is cows, and the number two export is college grads. And if we're not creating
yeah,
forums for us to lead and for young people to see us be successful,
yeah.
we're going to keep exporting all of our talented young people. And so the Future Caucus was born out of this idea that they needed a space to be visible and to get the professional development and experience and leadership sort
Mm.
of wins, notches on their belt to be sort of that inspiration for young people who could see a future for themselves in
Yeah.
Kansas. And I think that those spaces and just more and more young people who are now stepping into public service have a hunger for that and are really looking for places and spaces where they can learn.
Love it. And so now let's get back to like the kind of recruitment kind of effort. Like, I feel like there's a bit of a barrier to entry right now. And I think you guys have published, some kind of press releases and comments around kind of, bomb threats and fear and harassment, right? Like, it seems to be a tough time to kind of put yourself out there, right? Like, I mean, with social media and this kind of rising tension and misinformation around the country, like, how hard it is it to convince kind of young people who mean well to actually even put themselves forward and run for office. And if they don't succeed, usually in the past, people who run the second or third time, they end up winning later, right? But like, if you've kind of gone through this and have a lot of bruises, like, are people willing to do it again?
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act, right? And at what point does it not add up? At what point are the risks too high that the payoff, the sense of public service that you get from
Yeah.
serving your community, or even just sort of making ends meet from a financial standpoint, like when does that not add up? And I think an important part in that, like, let's be real, politics is always going to be sort of a give and take, and there's going to
Yeah.
be conflict, and there's always going to be some amount of um, I think that's what a democracy is. It's a way to
Yeah.
peacefully resolve our conflict. It's when it gets violent, it's when it gets to a point of harassment that it's not okay. And one of the things that can help provide resiliency, I think, for people who are in the belly of the beast is supportive networks, is to know that there's more of us than there are of
Yeah.
sort of trolls online or people who are contributing to negative environment. We do, and maybe we can talk about this in a second, but we do an event called Future Summit
Mhm.
every year where we bring young lawmakers from across the country together for sort of a conference, and we do a whole bunch of professional development, policy conversations. But a big value proposition is just getting to meet other young
Yeah.
people who have your same job in
It's
other
great.
places. And we had one young woman from Florida who we didn't know this before she came, but had been on the cusp of just resigning, of just throwing in the towel. She'd been a really impactful legislator, but
Mhm.
she'd taken some tough votes and heard, a lot of negative feedback from people who she actually had been really working hard on behalf of their
Yeah.
community. And after coming to Future Summit, getting to meet other people who also were doing the job and were like, stick with it, you're doing great, we see you, getting some of the resources. She sent us a note and was like, I was going to quit and I feel re-energized. I am staying in the game.
That's
This has
great.
like totally recharged me. Thank you for this space. And now I know, I've got hundreds of people who have my back. And those
So,
kinds of networks
yeah,
are like, legislators are people too.
I mean,
I'm going to put
no,
on a t-shirt.
yeah, it's wild. So it's a funny dynamic, it feels like, because you have to go out on the road. You're setting up kind of satellite Future Caucus organizations and entities, and then you have the summit, right, where everyone's kind of coming to DC. Talk about like the significance of that, and is it just the legislators? What other kind of call to action is there, right? Like, do you need private sector partners showing up? Do you need educational and nonprofit partners showing up and like kind of talking through issues and advocacy? Like, how
Mhm.
what do you envision? Kind of like, if you can get people to DC, like, what do you want them to kind of benefit from and then go
Yeah.
home thinking about?
I think organizations are most successful when they know what their superpower is
Yeah.
and they focus on that one superpower. And Future Caucus's superpower is we are conveners. We are
Right.
super good at bringing people together across lines of difference, whether it's partisan difference, sector
Yeah.
differences, geographic, gender, religion, but bringing people together and creating a space where they can learn together and build together and take action together. And so Future Summit is sort of like the crown jewel of that experience. This year, we intend to have about 100 state lawmakers fly to DC between July 24th and 27th. We'll have members of Congress who participate as well, young members. And we're always looking for experts, people who have policy expertise to be a part of that, to share what they know, share their perspectives, and serve as, also inspiring speakers, people who can speak to the challenges of leadership. And I think, again, imagine you're a 28-year-old state lawmaker, or even like, 32-year-old member of Congress, like learning from people who have held really challenging leadership
Yeah.
roles in the past and how to get through it, how to think about your own sort of mental health as you make really, decisions that are sometimes in the gray of like, there's no clear right answer, but you have to sort of make a decision with the best information you have. Those are the kinds of conversations we like to have there. And so, open call, if anybody is interested in being a part of Future Summit, we would love, love, love to invite any of the Coffee with Ken
Love it.
community to be a part of that.
Well, as you know, my superpower is just, having coffee. So it's a we will deploy and put it out to work. So I want to just dive in a little bit more into some of the kind of silos and buckets, right? Like, you have literally created like an innovation lab, right? Like, talk a little bit about that. Talk about some of these tangible kind of offerings that you're providing to different legislators around the country.
Yeah. Okay. So the Innovation Lab is so cool. Thank you so much for asking about it, because when we first launched our organization, we were just bringing young people together and then asking them, what do you need? And then we'd like go run around and like give it to them.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, that's like not a super sustainable way to scale a
Yeah.
business. And so last year we did a field-wide survey of bipartisan legislation that was passed across the country. We also worked with the members of our network to say, what are the issues that are top of mind for you and your constituency? And the result, like the Venn diagram of that, is something called the Innovation Agenda, which outlines 6 key issues that are like a blueprint, a menu of options for young lawmakers who want to find something to start working on together to actually look through the agenda and see where are the opportunities for me to get the ball rolling, and where has this been done before. And so the Innovation Lab really catalyzes that into action. We do briefings, we do events, we do trips for people, not just to learn from other lawmakers about what's worked and what hasn't worked in their states, but also to learn from policy experts. You know, we just had in Montana a really critical sort of housing bill passed the Montana legislature.
Interesting.
And we had one of our young members there actually fly to, well, this isn't to Kansas again, and to testify at their housing hearing. And so you start to see bills cross-pollinate in ways that the network sort of facilitates easy sharing. And so the Innovation Lab is sort of like a policy accelerator that one ingredient is lawmakers, one ingredient is really smart people and ideas, and outcomes, solutions that transcend polarization.
Because any lawmaker is not going to really face an issue that another lawmaker probably hasn't faced already, right? I mean,
Totally. Yeah. And I think one other story that I'll share is we had in Arkansas, one of our members was the first woman ever in Arkansas to give birth while in office. Nobody had ever been pregnant and had a baby while they were in office. And so when she went to run again, she found that she couldn't use her campaign dollars to pay for childcare. That was illegal. And so she changed the law. And that is a bill now that has passed in dozens of other
oh
states.
wow,
And I think those kinds of those kinds of experiences, one of the things we focus on is healthcare. And so having like a forum to be like, here's what my experience was, here's how I did it. She was a Republican, here's how I got sort of everyone on board in my state. Those kinds of tactical things are really helpful. And then working with policy partners to come in and provide sort of a national perspective as well.
So in today's kind of polarized climate, it feels like at times that there's a disincentive to collaborate and work together. Because then you go back and it's like, oh, you're working with the other side of the aisle, right? Like, are you seeing that? Is that real? How do we kind of overcome it? And maybe it's not the case in the local level as much as the national, but I feel like nationally it just everything seems to be so high stakes and it's more about like, winning versus collaborating kind of thing. Back in
Yeah.
the day, it felt like, and we had this in a different conversation, where like, even Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan could like, have a drink at the end of the night and find ways to work together on behalf of the greater good. It doesn't feel like that anymore.
Yeah. A lot of what we're disagreeing about is how we get to the solution and not about the problem itself.
Hmm.
And what we've seen be successful is when you can do the process, which takes longer and is
Yeah.
harder, to build buy-in around we agree this is a problem, people are way more likely to support whatever the outcome is, whatever the solution is, because they've built trust now that you're sort of doing things the right way. Because it's such a noisy media environment, it's really hard to do that. And it's really hard to do that at scale. And I think people get really frustrated when they see an outcome that doesn't perfectly align
Yeah.
with the solution that they thought was the right way to go. And that leads to just this like reaction where you're like, I lost, they won, this is bad. And so what we try to do is along the way, tell the story of how people are working together in really effective ways in order to get these really innovative, forward-looking solutions. And that we've seen doing that in a way that feels not like your typical political outlet is telling that
Sure.
story, but like we've done, we've gotten stories in People magazine, like to sort of make it relatable and make it interesting and actually like honestly just have people pay attention. I think that process of getting people bought in and aware is a big part of the solution to how you get to lower the temperature a little bit and get people less concerned with winning and more concerned with effective policy.
Are there things, maybe not as an organization, but you personally kind of being exposed to this, kind of feel need to happen at the national level, and whether it's just like, election reform, civics education, kind of, ranked choice voting, like, are there some kind of macro democracy efforts that you kind of think would make everything you're working on a little easier, like whether it's nationally or locally?
Yeah, I think there's definitely like three buckets of types of challenges, and one is structural reforms, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
and one thing that I've noticed, and that just from a data point, the fastest growing political affiliation is independent
Mm,
or not affiliated.
yeah.
And I think what ends up happening is at the national level, especially in primaries, a lot of people who don't identify as a pure Democrat or a pure Republican are not able to be a part of selecting the candidate. They don't get to vote in
Yeah.
primary because they're closed. And I think if we were to make a more flexible system that
Mm,
included everybody's voice earlier on, especially, considering how sort of gerrymandered some states
yeah.
are, I think that would lead to, I think that in and of itself would make a huge radical change.
Yeah.
But that's only part of the problem, right? I think the structural reforms, if we fix that and we're sending lots of different types of people to Congress, I think you still have a leadership problem, right? We
Yeah.
need our leaders to be able to engage across that difference. We could actually exacerbate the problem if we just send a ton more diversity
Sure.
ideologically to Congress, and we don't actually equip people to navigate that well. So I do still think like that professional development, the spaces for people to build
Yeah.
relationships and actually practice working across differences from a leadership perspective is still really, really important. And in
Yeah.
Congress, you just don't have that time. It's really, really tough to carve that time out. And so
Yeah. No, so true.
yeah.
Interesting. Well, I mean, this is so exciting what you guys are up to. And just to kind of close it out, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is there's a bit of a silver lining out there as you kind of get out of Washington and crisscross the country, and that we shouldn't all just kind of, be depressed all the time. And there might be kind of, some positive trends happening nationally with some new energy and new collaboration happening, huh? So is that the kind of main theme?
Yeah, Ken, 100%. I think that stat we talked about earlier that 1/5 of lawmakers are young, 1/3 of bipartisan legislation is written by a young person. That speaks to something on the horizon that's really worth nurturing and scaling. And I'm excited about what we're doing. We're working with, great other partner organizations who are helping to scale that. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of work. But I believe that, helping to retain the incredible young talent that we have in public service roles today is going to lead to a much, much healthier future where we actually get a lot of things done.
Well, Layla, always so great to see you. So refreshing and just it's inspiring. I mean, I know everything you're working on, but to just hear it and dive in a little bit more so beneficial. So thanks for what you're doing and safe travels on the road. I mean, amazing.
Thanks, Ken. And if anyone wants to visit futurecaucus.org, tons of ways to get involved, share some of the positive stories of our lawmakers, and let me know if you'd like to be a part of any of our programming in DC or across the country.
Love it. And you're going to be able to catch this video and our past videos on coffeewithken.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube to stay up to date with all of our talks. Thanks so much, Layla. Great to see you.
Thanks, Ken.